Imagine a world 6,000 years ago before recorded history. The landscape was a chaotic dance between two colossal rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. A land of unforgiving marshes, teeming with venomous snakes, swarms of mosquitoes, and an endless expanse of treacherous mud. Every year, in a brutal cycle of life and death, these two mighty rivers would swell with melting snow from the distant mountains, unleashing a fury of floods that scoured the land, reshaping the very landscape. This was a world of chaos and struggle, a place no one would have ever predicted a civilization would be born. But in this crucible of nature, something extraordinary happened. A people who called themselves the Sumerians refused to be victims of their environment. They looked at the wild, untamed rivers not as a threat, but as an opportunity. They were not just survivors, they were pioneers. They were the trailblazers of human history. With primitive tools fashioned from stone, bone, and sun-dried clay, they began the monumental task of taming the wild water. They developed ingenious systems of canals and ditches, creating an intricate web of irrigation that diverted the floodwaters and channeled it to the parched land. They built massive earthen dikes and reservoirs, storing water for the long, blistering summers. This was not a small-scale effort. It was a monumental project that required a level of cooperation and organization never before seen. This collective struggle to control the rivers forged their society. It gave birth to a complex hierarchy. To manage these immense public works, they needed leaders, Lugal Ataraja, to command the labor of thousands. They needed administrators to manage the distribution of water and the bountiful harvests that followed. They needed priests to interpret the will of the gods who they believed controlled the river's destructive power. From the mud of Mesopotamia, they built the very first cities, monumental achievements of walls, towering ziggurats, and bustling markets that defied the harsh landscape. This was the moment humanity moved from small scattered villages to a grand organized society. The city of Uruk, for example, grew to become the world's first true metropolis, a teeming urban center of over 40,000 people. But their greatest invention wasn't the city. It was the written word. On small tablets of wet clay, they scratched symbols with a reed stylus, cuneiform, that initially tracked grain and cattle. But quickly, this simple system evolved into the language of humanity itself. It was the birth of history, the moment we began to record our triumphs and our tragedies, our laws and our legends. From these clay tablets, we read the stories of their kings, their gods, their wars, and their deepest fears. They were the first to organize a society, the first to build a city, the first to invent writing. They laid the very foundation of the world we live in today. Yet, lurking beneath this incredible success was a fatal flaw, a vulnerability as deep as the canals they dug, a flaw that would, over centuries, become a self-inflicted wound. A tale of conflict, environmental disaster, and the rise of new empires. This is the story of how the world's first superpower rose and why it fell. The Sumerian civilization was never a unified nation. It was a volatile patchwork of rival city-states, each a self-governing superpower with its own king, its own standing army, and its own divine protector. These cities were not merely towns, they were immense cultural and political centers. At its heart was Uruk, hailed as the world's first true city. Its walls, a legendary 9 kilometers in length, were said to have been built by the great hero King Gilgamesh himself, a testament to human ambition. Here, the art of writing was born and refined, and the city became a beacon of innovation and art. To the south lay Ur, a bustling trade hub, its docks filled with exotic goods from distant lands, its towering ziggurat a testament to its immense wealth and the piety of its people. The city of Nippur, though not always a political powerhouse, held immense religious significance as the sacred center of Sumeria, home to the temple of the god Enlil. In Lagash, the art of bureaucracy was perfected, with meticulously detailed clay tablets recording every transaction, every legal dispute, and every harvest report, giving us an unprecedented glimpse into the daily life of an ancient civilization. The social structure of these city-states was a rigid pyramid, reflecting their belief that a divine order governed the world. At the very top stood the Lugal, the king who was seen as the physical representative of the city's god on earth. He commanded the armies, presided over grand religious ceremonies, and was responsible for maintaining order and prosperity. Below him was an elite class of powerful priests and priestesses who managed the massive temple complexes. These temples were not just places of worship, they were the economic engines of the city, owning vast tracts of land, employing artisans and distributing rations to the population. Below them were the scribes, a highly respected and powerful class who held a monopoly on knowledge, mastering the complex cuneiform script after years of rigorous training. They were the keepers of history, the writers of laws, and the architects of bureaucracy. The rest of society was comprised of a diverse mix of merchants, artisans, soldiers, and at the very bottom, the vast population of farmers and laborers who toiled in the fields and built the great cities. The farmers, the backbone of the entire civilization, worked tirelessly to produce the surplus that fueled everything else. It was a complex, interconnected system, a fragile balance of power and labor, all contained within the walls of a single city. Yet this very independence, this very pride was also their greatest weakness. They were so focused on competing with one another that they failed to see the larger dangers looming on the horizon. For the Sumerians, the gods were not distant or abstract. They were real, powerful, and deeply involved in human affairs. The world was a stage where mortals performed for the divine, and the gods, with their often temperamental nature, were the ultimate directors. At the head of their vast pantheon was An, the god of the heavens, a figure of remote but ultimate authority. Below him was Enlil, the god of air and storms and the true king of the gods. He was both a creator and a destroyer, a terrifying force of nature who could bring forth a great flood or bless the land with life-giving winds. Then there was Enki, the god of wisdom, fresh water, and magic. He was often seen as humanity's greatest benefactor, a cunning and compassionate figure who intervened on behalf of mortals. The most compelling and complex deity was Inanna, the goddess of love, fertility, and war, a volatile, beautiful, and utterly ruthless deity who personified the very dualities of life and death. Her stories were filled with drama, passion, and betrayal, reflecting the chaotic nature of the human experience. The towering ziggurats they built were not just buildings. They were literal stairways to the heavens, physical homes for the gods on earth. It was believed that the gods descended from the heavens to reside in these temples. The priests and priestesses who served there were the sole intermediaries, holding the sacred duty of performing rituals, making offerings, and interpreting the will of the gods through celestial observations and divination. They held immense power, for they were the only ones who could protect the city from the gods' wrath and ensure its prosperity. It was in this world of divine power that the greatest epic of all time was born, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This was more than a story. It was a profound exploration of what it means to be human. It tells the tale of Gilgamesh, the mighty king of Uruk, who was 2/3 god and 1/3 man. Arrogant, cruel, and oppressive in his youth, he is humbled by his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, a divine creation sent to challenge him. Together they embark on epic quests, fighting monsters and defying the gods. But when Enkidu is killed by the gods as punishment for their defiance, Gilgamesh is gripped by the ultimate human fear, death. He embarks on a desperate, solitary quest for eternal life, a journey that takes him to the ends of the earth to find the flood survivor, Utnapishtim, the only mortal granted immortality. But in the end he fails. He returns to Uruk, a changed man, with the bitter but powerful realization that immortality is not for mortals. The only true immortality lies in a king's legacy and the stories left behind. The epic serves as a timeless reminder of the human condition, a testament to the Sumerian worldview that life is fleeting, and the gods are ultimately in control. The vibrant network of Sumerian city-states was a fragile one. While trade and culture flourished, a deep, persistent poison was eating away at the core of their civilization. Constant warfare. With limited fertile land and water resources, the cities were locked in a brutal, zero-sum game of dominance. Border disputes over land and access to the life-giving rivers turned into bloody, century-long conflicts. The war between the city-states of Lagash and Umma is a perfect example of this self-destructive cycle. For over 100 years, they fought over a fertile plain called the Guadena, or the Plain of Eden. We have detailed records of this conflict, including the Stele of the Vultures, a stark monument depicting the king of Lagash, Eannatum, leading his army over the bodies of his fallen enemies. This endless cycle of violence bled their treasuries dry, decimated their young male population who were needed for labor and defense, and shattered any hope of a unified Sumerian nation. But a far deadlier enemy was rising, not from a rival city but from the very ground they stood on. The same irrigation that had brought them prosperity was now a silent killer. The rivers carried tiny amounts of salt and minerals. As the water evaporated under the scorching sun, the salt was left behind, slowly but surely accumulating in the soil. Over centuries, this process, known as salinization, poisoned the earth. The rich, fertile land that once produced vast fields of wheat now struggled to grow anything. Scribes, in their detailed records on clay tablets, noted a terrifying drop in wheat harvests, forcing them to switch to a more salt-tolerant crop, barley. But even barley yields began to plummet. Famine loomed, and the once mighty city-states, weakened by their internal wars in a poisoned land, became incredibly vulnerable. Their population was starving, their resources were depleted, and their military was exhausted. They were a civilization on its knees, ripe for the taking by a new, more powerful force waiting in the wings. This environmental catastrophe, combined with the endless internal strife, created the perfect storm for a collapse that was no longer a question of if, but when. As Sumeria's cities bled each other dry, a new power was forging an empire in the north. His name was Sargon. His story is the stuff of legend. An infant son of a priestess, set adrift in a basket on the Euphrates River, only to be rescued and raised by a gardener. But Sargon was no ordinary man. He was a military genius with a singular vision. He overthrew the king of the city of Kish and began his campaign of conquest, a campaign that would change the world forever. With a well-drilled professional army, a new concept at the time, he moved with breathtaking speed. One by one, the divided, war-torn city-states of Sumer, too weak to defend themselves, fell to his might. The great walls of Uruk, and Lagash were no match for his disciplined forces. He didn't just conquer them, he united them. He created the world's first true empire, the Akkadian Empire, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. This conquest was a seismic event. Sargon imposed a new language, Akkadian, a Semitic tongue, on the Sumerian-speaking lands. While the cuneiform script was kept, the language of the people began to change. Sumerian culture and religion also began to merge with Akkadian traditions, creating a new, vibrant blend. The Akkadian deity Ishtar was seen as the counterpart to the Sumerian Inanna, and the pantheons slowly became one. Sargon's reign brought a period of peace and prosperity, the likes of which Sumeria had not seen in centuries. He was an unprecedented king, a man who, unlike the Sumerian rulers, did not claim divinity, but instead claimed power through sheer military force and his divine favor from the gods. He proved that a single powerful leader could unite a divided land. But Sargon's empire, built on the strength of one man, was as fragile as it was vast. After his death, it began to crumble under the weight of internal rebellion and constant pressure from external enemies. Sargon's descendants struggled to hold the sprawling empire together, and it ultimately fell apart. The fall of the Akkadian Empire plunged Mesopotamia into a period of chaos and anarchy. The land was overrun by the Gutians, a brutal mountain people who swept down from the Zagros Mountains. In their records, the Sumerians called them a venomous snake from the mountains, a people without kingship, without order. This was Sumeria's dark age. Trade collapsed, the great irrigation canals fell into disrepair, and cities were sacked. The chaos lasted for nearly a century, a period of suffering that the Sumerians would never forget. It seemed as though the great civilization was gone forever, swallowed by the sands of time. But from the ashes, a final flicker of hope was born. In the city of Uruk, a king named Utuhengal rose up and drove the Gutians out of Sumeria. His victory ushered in a final, glorious but brief renaissance, the third dynasty of Ur, or the Ur-3 period. Led by powerful kings like Ur-Nammu, the Sumerians attempted to reclaim their former glory. They rebuilt the magnificent ziggurats that had been damaged, including the great ziggurat of Ur, a symbol of their renewed power and piety. Ur-Nammu also created one of the earliest known law codes, laying down a foundation for justice and order that would be emulated for centuries to come. The Sumerian language and culture, almost lost to the Akkadians, experienced a final resurgence. For a moment, it seemed they had beaten back the tides of history, but the deep-seated problems remained. The salinized land was still a silent killer, and powerful new enemies, the Amorites from the west and the Elamites from the east, were now a constant, relentless threat. This glorious last stand was doomed from the start. The end came swiftly and brutally. The Ur-3 kingdom, weakened by famine and constant border wars, was besieged by the Amorites and the Elamites. The great city of Ur, once the jewel of the empire, was laid to ruin. The Lament for Ur, a haunting poem written by a surviving scribe, paints a tragic picture of the city's final moments. Its people were scattered like dust, the poem reads. The house of joy was made a house of sorrow. The ziggurat, a symbol of their connection to the gods, was destroyed, and the last king, Ibisin, was led away in chains. This was the final devastating blow. The Sumerian political and cultural identity was gone forever. The dust of time has long since covered the ruins of their cities. But the legacy of the Sumerians lives on, woven into the very fabric of our modern world. Their innovations were not just for them, they were for all of humanity. Their cuneiform script, the very first writing system, paved the way for every book ever written. Their concept of the 60-second minute and the 60-minute hour, a system based on their sexagesimal, base 60 mathematics, is still used to measure time and angles today. Their law codes, which emphasized fairness and justice, laid the groundwork for future legal systems. The story of Sumeria is more than a historical footnote. It is a powerful reminder that even the most brilliant civilizations are fragile, and that their downfall can come from a combination of external threats and internal flaws. The story of the first civilization is not a tale of failure. It is a timeless lesson about the rise, glory, and ultimate fate of all civilizations. Were you captivated by the epic rise and fall of the world's first civilization? Do you want to uncover more lost stories and forgotten histories? Don't miss our next chapter. Join us as we journey through time and explore the incredible, long-lost chapters of human history.